The people who should have protected her were the ones who sold her. Not strangers, not enemies, her own family. By the time Lady Clara discovered what they had done, the wedding dress had already been chosen, the church had already been booked, and the marriage contract had already been signed. Then her aunt quietly said, "You belong to Blackwood now." Clara looked at her, smiled, and laughed. She thought it was a joke. No one else did. Before we uncover how a bride vanished hours before a wedding arranged in her name, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Candlelit Vows, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own family traded your future without asking you? The laughter died when Clara saw her uncle standing in the doorway. Lord Percival Vale simply watched her. Beside him, Aunt Beatrice smoothed the ivory wedding gown laid across Clara's bed. It was beautiful. That made it worse. "Whose wedding is this?" Clara asked. Her aunt lifted the veil as though Clara had asked whether it might rain. "Blackwood's carriage arrives at 10 tomorrow morning." Clara looked from the dress to her uncle. "What carriage?" Lord Percival closed the bedroom door. "Your father left obligations." "My father left land, investments, and a trust. He left debts." "That is not true." Percival's mouth hardened. "You were a child. I was 20 when he died. Grief makes children of us all." He placed a folded document on the dressing table. The Blackwood seal had been pressed into black wax. Clara stared at it. "What is this?" "A settlement." She opened it. The meaning was brutally simple. House Vale's alleged debts would be cleared. The estate would remain under Percival's control. In return, Lady Clara Vale would enter a marriage arrangement with the Duke of Blackwood. Her name appeared near the bottom, written in another hand. "I did not sign this. Your guardian signed for you. You stopped being my guardian 3 years ago. The court recognizes my authority over the estate. The estate is mine, not if creditors take it." Clara lifted her eyes. "Did the Duke ask for me?" They hesitated. "Did he?" she repeated. Percival folded the contract carefully. "That no longer matters." It mattered more than anything. If Blackwood had requested her, then a powerful stranger believed money had purchased the right to her life. If he had not, someone was lying. "I will not marry him." Her aunt finally looked up. Beatrice looked afraid. "You will. Why?" "Because servants need wages, tenants need seed, this family needs its name." "And I am the price?" Percival answered. "You are the solution." Clara looked at the wedding dress. "No, I am a person." Her uncle stepped closer. "Tomorrow you will stand in the chapel, speak the vows, and save what your father left behind." "My father would never have agreed to this. Your father is dead." Before leaving, Percival glanced back. "The windows will be locked tonight. 2 footmen will remain outside. Do not embarrass us." The key turned after them. Clara stood beside the dress until daylight faded. Anger became grief. Her father had taught her that love without respect was possession wearing a kinder face. Now his own brother was using the family name to erase everything he had taught her. At dusk, a maid brought supper. "Martha," Clara whispered, "is the eastern corridor guarded?" "Every main passage is." "The library?" Martha glanced at the door. "They boarded the old servants' stair years ago." Clara remembered the hidden library panel. Her father had called it the house's second memory. The passage opened into the abandoned conservatory and ended beside the north garden wall. "Every old house has more than one way out," he had told her. At midnight, Clara removed the pearl ring her aunt had forced onto her finger and placed it beside the untouched wedding gown. She tied her mother's silver bracelet around her wrist, wrapped bread in a handkerchief, and waited. When the clock struck 1, she pulled the bell cord. A footman unlocked the door. "What is it?" "I feel faint." While he called for the maid, Clara slipped behind the wardrobe, pressed the carved rose her father once showed her, and heard the hidden panel release. Darkness swallowed her. She entered and followed the passage by touch. Dust filled her lungs. Behind her, voices rose as the servants discovered the empty room. Clara kept moving. The passage opened beneath the ruined conservatory. She crossed the garden, removed the loose stone from the northern wall, and climbed through. She stood beyond the estate alone. Her plan was simple: reach Belmere, her mother's village, before Percival's men found her. She had no horse, little food, and no money. Only the road, the storm, and her father's promise that there was always another way out. Hours later, the rain became violent. Wind bent the trees. Mud swallowed her shoes. Clara sheltered beneath an ancient oak, soaked and shaking, when hoofbeats sounded through the storm. She pressed herself against the trunk, certain her uncle had found her. A rider dismounted, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark travelling coat. He approached slowly, keeping his hands visible. Clara reached for a fallen branch. "Stay back." The stranger stopped. "I mean you no harm." That is what men say before deciding what a woman belongs to. Something changed in his expression. He removed his coat and held it toward her. Clara did not take it. For several seconds neither moved. Thunder rolled above them. Clara expected him to seize her arm, call for help, or demand her name. Instead, he lowered the coat, giving her space, as though her fear mattered more than his questions. That frightened her as much as kindness. "Who are you?" she asked. He studied her torn sleeve, bare hands, and terrified eyes. Then he asked the question no one else had bothered to ask. "Who are you hiding from?" "Who are you hiding from?" The question caught Clara completely off guard. Every person she had met since her father's death had asked who she belonged to, what title she carried, or what she could offer. No one had asked who she feared. Rain dripped from her tangled hair as she tightened her grip on the broken branch. "If I tell you," she whispered, "you'll only take me back." The stranger remained where he stood, several feet away. He slowly removed his heavy travelling coat and placed it across a fallen log, instead of forcing it into her hands. "If I intended to force you," he replied calmly, "I wouldn't be standing this far away." Clara studied him through the rain. He was unlike the gentleman she had grown up around. His clothes were expensive, but there was nothing boastful about him. Mud covered his riding boots, rain soaked his dark coat. He looked like a man returning from honest work, rather than one travelling to a grand dinner. "You may keep the branch," he said quietly. "I promise not to make you use it." Against her own judgment, Clara almost smiled. "You're either very confident," she murmured, "or very foolish. Perhaps both." Thunder rolled above them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Clara accepted the coat, wrapping it tightly around her trembling shoulders. It was still warm. "Thank you," she whispered, though she remained cautious. "Would you like to tell me your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated. If her uncle had already begun searching, every constable and every coaching inn would soon know Lady Clara Ashbourne had disappeared. Giving her name could send her straight back. "I'd rather not." "Very well," he nodded. "Then I won't ask again." She frowned. "You're not curious?" "Curiosity isn't always kindness." Clara looked at him in silence. Most people would insist. Most people forget that frightened people don't owe strangers their trust. Something inside her softened, though only slightly. Rain continued to pour around them. "Where are you going?" he asked. Clara gave a tired laugh. "If I knew, I probably wouldn't be standing beneath an oak tree in the middle of a storm." "Fair point." He looked toward his horse. "There's a hunting lodge a few miles from here. It's warm, dry, and the keeper has never refused me shelter." Clara immediately stepped backward. "No." "You'd rather stay here?" "I'd rather stay free." He understood immediately. "You think I'm trying to take you somewhere against your will?" She remained silent. "Then allow me to ask differently." His voice became even softer. "Would you allow me to help you reach somewhere safe?" Clara stared at him. He had not told her what to do. He had not ordered her to follow him. He had asked. She realized no one had asked what she wanted since her father died. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you helping me?" He looked toward the rain-soaked road. "Because no one walks alone through a storm at midnight unless something terrible has happened." Clara lowered her eyes. "Something terrible has." He looked at the exhausted young woman standing barefoot in the mud, her dress soaked, her hands trembling from cold. "My horse is strong enough for both of us," he said. "If you're willing, I'll take you to the lodge. If you decide to leave in the morning, no one will stop you." Clara hesitated for several long seconds before finally giving the smallest nod. He helped her onto the horse without touching her any more than necessary, then climbed up behind her, keeping a respectful distance even as they rode through the storm. Nearly an hour later they reached a small stone hunting lodge hidden deep among towering pines. An elderly gamekeeper hurried to the door, holding a lantern. "Good heavens!" he exclaimed. "Come inside before you both freeze." "Thank you, Thomas," the stranger replied warmly. Thomas looked at Clara only once before opening the door wider. The fire's already lit. Inside, flames crackled in the stone fireplace while Clara warmed her frozen hands around a steaming cup of tea. She remained near the doorway, unwilling to make herself too comfortable in a stranger's shelter. The gentleman noticed, but respected her distance. Thomas soon returned, carrying fresh bread and hot stew. "You both look as though you've crossed the entire county." Clara realized she had eaten nothing since breakfast. Embarrassed, she thanked him quietly. Throughout supper, the stranger never once asked about her past. Instead, they spoke about the storm, flooded roads, damaged bridges, and the farmers whose fields would suffer because of the heavy rain. He spoke with unusual concern for ordinary people. "You know the tenants well," Clara observed. "I try to. You must own land. I do. A large estate, large enough to keep me occupied. Married?" He smiled faintly. "No." "Engaged?" "No." Clara looked into her teacup. "Then someone somewhere is probably trying to arrange it." This time he laughed softly. "That seems to be everyone's favorite occupation." For the first time that night, Clara laughed with him. By dawn, the storm had passed. Mist drifted between the trees while birds slowly returned to the forest. Outside the lodge, Thomas stood beside a gentle chestnut mare already saddled and waiting. "She belongs to the lodge," Thomas explained kindly. "You may borrow her for the journey." Clara looked surprised. "I couldn't possibly." Thomas smiled. "You'll return her another day." The stranger simply nodded. "It's safer than walking." Reluctantly, Clara accepted. They rode through the quiet countryside beneath a pale morning sky. The stranger never rode beside her. He remained several yards ahead, allowing her space, and never once asking where she had come from or where she intended to go. By late afternoon, the trees opened onto a magnificent estate surrounded by ancient oaks and beautifully maintained gardens. Ahead stood enormous wrought-iron gates. Clara's horse slowed. Her heart nearly stopped. Cast into the center of the gates was a familiar crest. A black raven standing upon a shield, her face drained of color. "Blackwood," she whispered. The stranger turned in his saddle. "Yes." She immediately pulled the mare to a halt. "No." He looked confused. "Is something wrong?" Her breathing quickened. You brought me here. I brought you somewhere I believed would be safe. She shook her head. This is Blackwood. Her voice trembled. This is where they were taking me. For a long moment he simply looked at her, unable to understand. Before either of them could speak again, the elderly gatekeeper emerged from the gatehouse. The moment he saw the stranger, he smiled warmly and swung the heavy gates open. "Good afternoon, sir." The stranger acknowledged him with a polite nod and continued riding forward. Clara remained frozen outside the gates. Every instinct told her to turn back, but behind her lay miles of empty countryside, soaked roads, and nowhere to go. Slowly, reluctantly, she followed. They rode in complete silence along the long, tree-lined drive until Blackwood Manor finally appeared in the distance, magnificent beneath the afternoon sun. The moment they approached the front steps, the great oak doors opened, housemaids lined the entrance, footmen hurried down the staircase. The elderly butler descended last, stopping before the stranger with a deep, respectful bow. "Welcome home, Your Grace." Clara's world stopped. She slowly turned toward the man who had rescued her beneath the oak tree. The man she had trusted. The man she believed had unknowingly returned her to the very place she had escaped. He met her stunned gaze with the same quiet kindness he had shown since the storm. "Miss," he said gently, "my name is Edmund Blackwood." Clara could barely find her voice. "You're the Duke?" "Yes." A painful silence settled between them. Then Edmund frowned ever so slightly. "And I have absolutely no idea why anyone told you that you belong to me. My name is Edmund Blackwood." The words echoed inside Clara's mind long after he had spoken them. She stared at him as though the world had suddenly forgotten how to make sense. The man who had wrapped his coat around her shoulders beneath the storm, the man who had shared his horse without asking her name, the man who had respected every boundary she had drawn, was the very Duke she had spent 2 days fearing. Edmund noticed the disbelief in her eyes, but made no attempt to explain himself. Instead, he spoke with the same quiet calm that had followed him since the forest. "Miss, would you please come inside?" Clara remained where she stood. "Whatever has happened," he continued gently, "I promise you'll be heard before anyone makes another decision." She almost laughed, though there was no humour in it. "Heard?" she whispered. "Do you know how long it's been since anyone asked what I wanted?" Edmund held her gaze without looking away. "Then let today be the first." Those 6 words reached somewhere inside her that anger never had. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Clara stepped through the great doors of Blackwood Manor. The entrance hall was magnificent, filled with marble floors, sweeping staircases, portraits of generations past, and warm afternoon sunlight pouring through stained glass windows. Yet Clara noticed none of it. She only noticed that every servant who looked at her seemed curious rather than judgmental. No one whispered. No one stared cruelly. No one treated her as though she had already become property. Edmund removed his gloves and handed them to the butler. "Mrs. Collins," he said. Within moments an elegant elderly housekeeper appeared. Her silver hair was neatly arranged beneath a lace cap, and kindness rested naturally upon her face. "Your Grace." "Miss—" Edmund paused before smiling apologetically toward Clara. "I still don't know your surname." Clara lowered her eyes. "Clara is enough, for now." Edmund nodded respectfully. "Miss Clara requires a warm bath, clean clothes, and a proper meal. If she wishes to see a physician, please arrange one immediately." Mrs. Collins smiled warmly. "Of course." Clara looked from one to the other in quiet confusion. "You're not asking me anything?" Edmund shook his head. You've spent a night walking through a storm. Questions can wait. But surely you want to know why I came here. Eventually, he offered the faintest smile. People tell the truth more easily when they no longer feel cornered. Clara had no answer. Mrs. Collins gently touched her arm. Come with me, dear. Nearly an hour later, Clara stood before a mirror she barely recognized. The mud had been washed away. Her hair had been carefully brushed and pinned. She now wore a simple forest green Victorian day dress, borrowed from one of the Duke's distant relatives who occasionally stayed at the manor. It was elegant without being extravagant. Mrs. Collins noticed Clara staring at herself. You look more like someone who's finally had a chance to breathe. Clara's reflection smiled sadly. I can't remember the last time I felt safe enough to breathe. Mrs. Collins hesitated before speaking. I've served this family for 32 years. Clara turned toward her. I've watched His Grace refuse princesses, duchesses, daughters of powerful men. She smiled knowingly, but I've never once seen him refuse kindness. Those words lingered in Clara's thoughts all the way downstairs. Breakfast had already been prepared despite the late hour. Fresh bread, eggs, fruit, tea, and warm pastries filled the small morning room overlooking the gardens. To Clara's surprise, Edmund was already seated, but not at the head of the table. He had deliberately chosen one of the side chairs, leaving the place of honour empty. Good morning, he said simply. Clara sat opposite him. Silence settled between them as servants quietly poured tea before disappearing without another word. Edmund buttered a slice of bread. The roses survived the storm. Clara blinked. I'm sorry? The western gardens usually flood. He glanced toward the window. Fortunately, the gardeners built new drainage channels last autumn. Clara looked at him in disbelief. You're talking about flowers? At the moment, yes. Why? Edmund spread marmalade across another slice of bread. Because you're eating. She frowned. I don't understand. People rarely enjoy breakfast while defending themselves. Clara stared at him. Then, despite everything, she smiled. You're very unusual. I've heard that before. Another silence followed, though this one felt strangely comfortable. Finally, Clara placed her teacup down. I should tell you the truth. Edmund met her eyes. Only because you want to, not because you think you owe me. She took a long breath. Yesterday morning my aunt placed a wedding dress on my bed. Edmund listened without interrupting. She told me, Clara swallowed hard, that I belonged to Blackwood now. His expression remained calm, though something in his eyes sharpened. My uncle claimed my late father had died buried beneath enormous debts. Did he? Clara answered without hesitation. No. You're certain? I kept father's account books during the last year of his illness. The estate was healthy. Edmund leaned forward slightly, but remained silent. My uncle said the debts had been settled because he had agreed to marry me to the Duke of Blackwood. She reached into the small satchel Mrs. Collins had rescued from her belongings. Carefully unfolding several damp papers, she placed the marriage contract upon the table. He showed me this. Edmund examined it quietly. His eyes moved across every line. The Blackwood seal, the witnesses, the signatures. Finally he looked back at Clara. Did you sign this? No. Did anyone ask for your permission? No. Another pause. Clara lowered her voice until it was barely audible. May I tell you something I'm ashamed of? Edmund nodded gently. Tears gathered in her eyes. When I saw the Blackwood crest, her voice trembled. I thought you'd bought me. The room became completely silent. Edmund looked at the contract once more before folding it very carefully. When he finally spoke, there was sadness in his voice rather than anger. Miss Clara, he paused, choosing every word with care. No woman should ever have to believe that. Clara looked away, unable to meet his eyes. Edmund rose slowly from his chair and walked toward the window overlooking the gardens. After several moments, he turned back. There is one man who can answer whether this document has any legal authority. He rang the small silver bell resting upon the mantel. The butler appeared almost immediately. Your Grace, please ask Mr. William Hawthorne to come to the manor at once. Immediately, sir. Less than 30 minutes later, an elderly gentleman entered carrying several leather-bound ledgers beneath one arm. His spectacles rested low upon his nose, and his face bore the calm confidence of a man who had spent decades dealing in law rather than gossip. He bowed respectfully. Your Grace, you sent for me. Edmund placed the folded contract on the library table between them. Mr. Hawthorne, his voice remained calm, but Clara noticed the firmness beneath it. I need you to tell me whether Blackwood has unknowingly become part of a crime. Mr. Hawthorne adjusted his spectacles and carefully unfolded the contract. The library fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Clara watched every movement of the elderly solicitor's hands. If he confirmed the document was genuine, everything she had feared would become true. Hawthorne examined the Blackwood seal first, then the signatures, then the paper itself. He reached into his leather case and removed a small magnifying lens. Several long moments passed before he finally looked up. His expression had completely changed. Good heavens, he murmured. Edmund remained calm. Is it genuine? Hawthorne looked down again. The parchment is authentic. He traced the seal with one finger. The Blackwood crest has been copied remarkably well. He turned another page. But, Clara's heart pounded, but what? Hawthorne placed the contract beside one of his official ledgers and compared the handwriting. Then he slowly removed his spectacles. Your Grace. Yes? This is not my signature. Clara blinked. Hawthorne continued. Someone has copied it. Quite skillfully, I might add, but not skillfully enough. Edmund stepped closer. You're certain? Without question. He pointed to a flourish beneath the final letter. I have signed every Blackwood legal document for 28 years. I never finish my signature this way. He opened another ledger. Nor would I ever prepare a marriage contract without both parties present. Clara could hardly breathe. So, Hawthorne nodded, this document has no legal authority whatsoever. Clara slowly lowered herself into the chair. Every terrifying thought she had carried through the storm, every mile she had walked believing she had been sold, every moment she had hated the name Blackwood, had been built upon a lie. Edmund looked toward her, his expression filled not with pride, but genuine sorrow. Miss Clara. She lifted tear-filled eyes toward him. On behalf of my family, he said quietly, I am deeply sorry our name was used to frighten you. That simple apology broke something inside her. She had expected arguments, defensiveness, excuses. Instead, the man she had feared most apologized for a crime he had never committed. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. I spent 2 days hating you, she whispered. Edmund offered a sad smile. Considering what you believed, he paused. I imagine I deserved it. Clara shook her head. No. She laughed softly through her tears. You didn't. Hawthorne gently closed the forged contract. There is something else you should both know. Edmund turned toward him. Go on. If Lord Percival forged legal documents, Hawthorne said carefully, I strongly suspect the alleged debts never existed either. Clara looked up immediately. My father's accounts? Exactly. Hawthorne nodded. If the estate was healthy when your father died, then someone benefited greatly by claiming otherwise. Edmund's expression darkened. Meaning? Meaning I believe Lord Percival may have stolen Miss Clara's inheritance. The words hung heavily in the room. Clara covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Suddenly everything made sense. The missing account books, the servants dismissed without explanation, the tenant farmers complaining that promised repairs had never been funded. Even her father's study being locked only days after the funeral. Percival had not been saving the estate. He had been stealing it. Clara stood abruptly and walked toward the tall library windows. Outside, sunlight danced across the gardens. Everything looked peaceful. Yet inside her, years of confusion were finally beginning to settle into painful clarity. Edmund quietly joined her, but kept several respectful steps between them. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, Clara whispered, "All this time," she swallowed, "I thought my father had failed us." Edmund looked toward the gardens. "He didn't." "I believed he had left me with nothing." "He didn't." She closed her eyes. "I believed," her voice almost disappeared, "that someone had paid to own me." Edmund looked at her with unmistakable compassion. "No one owns you." Those 4 words landed with more force than any speech could have. Clara slowly turned toward him. "Do you know," she said softly, "what hurts the most?" Edmund waited. "It isn't the forged contract." She shook her head. "It isn't even the lies." Another tear escaped. "It's realizing I doubted the kind of man my father spent his entire life teaching me to believe still existed." Edmund remained silent. Clara smiled sadly. "Then I met him, in the middle of a storm." Neither noticed Mrs. Collins quietly leaving the doorway, wiping away tears of her own. Hawthorne cleared his throat gently. "There remains one final matter." Edmund turned back. "Percival." "Yes." Hawthorne opened another ledger. "If he forged my signature, there will almost certainly be records leading us to the missing estate funds. We must act quickly before evidence disappears." Edmund nodded once. "We'll leave immediately after lunch." Clara looked surprised. "We?" "If you wish." She studied him carefully. Yesterday every decision had been made for her. Today the Duke had asked her permission 3 separate times. The difference mattered. "Yes," she answered quietly. "I wish." 3 days later, a royal magistrate arrived at Lord Percival's estate, carrying warrants for fraud, forgery, theft, and falsifying legal documents. The manor stood strangely quiet. Several servants confessed that Percival had departed before sunrise with 2 large trunks and the estate account books. He had vanished only hours before the magistrate's arrival. Edmund slowly folded the official report. "He's running." Hawthorne nodded grimly. "A guilty man usually does." Clara looked toward the road disappearing beyond the estate gates. Weeks earlier, she would have believed everything was lost. Now she felt something entirely different, hope. Edmund stepped beside her. "Miss Clara." She looked up. "Your uncle stole your inheritance." He paused. "He stole your family's reputation." Another pause. "And he stole years of your peace." Clara listened quietly. Edmund's voice softened. "I'd like to help you get all 3 back." For a long moment she simply looked at him. Then, for the very first time since her father's funeral, she smiled without sadness hiding behind it. "I'd like that too." Far beyond Blackwood Manor, Lord Percival believed he had escaped forever. He smiled to himself as his carriage disappeared into the northern hills, never imagining that the frightened young woman he had tried to sell now stood beside the one man powerful enough to expose every lie he had ever told. Their battle was no longer about a forged marriage. It had become a